What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we'll be going game by game, talking about the running backs I would be starting and sitting this week. I got a comment last week basically asking, why do I talk about the total and the spread of games before each breakdown? And I think it's just like a really important factor to consider that people really don't think about all that much, right? We're not starting players in a vacuum. They come attached to game environments. So it's important for us to know, are they on the team that should be winning in a game that's probably going to be high scoring? Or are they, an early down only back on the team that's projected to be losing in a low total game? Now, these are not like the end all be all, right? A game can have a 41 point total and we can see both teams go over 30. That can absolutely happen. We can see a team favored by 15 points, lose by 7. So these aren't just like things that you go by as absolutely going to happen, but we need to consider that they're still the most likely outcome. So when we see a really low total game and we consider these other factors, that the team might be losing, that it's a tough run defense, these are all things we should be considering when thinking about starting and sitting players. So that's the reason I talk about it. It's not for like a sports betting angle. This is not a sports betting video. It's to give ourselves like a framework of what we think kind of the game script and the game environment is going to be for each team. So that's kind of why I do that. So we'll go over all these games in a second. First, of course, have to start things off as usual, the side of the day. Yesterday's stat was excluding Devonta Smith. What other wide receiver ranks outside the top 45, despite being top 15 in both percentage team air yards and percentage team targets? This one, if we're going to be completely honest, like so many sites are different out there. Some sites say one number for percent air yards. Some say one number for percentage team targets. Like, it's kind of crazy. Darnell Mooney was the person that caught the cutoff on a few different sites, but again, it kind of depends where you're looking. Today's stat doesn't depend. This is an actual correct answer. What quarterback currently leads the league in EPA per attempt? So let's talk about some running backs. All right, first game up, we've got Bears at Browns. This game has seen its total drop. That is one thing. A lot of totals have dropped this week. I don't think there's anything huge that can go into that. I'll say the first 2 weeks were a little bit lower scoring, so maybe Vegas is kind of adjusting for that. But it's worth noting, a few teams came out with a higher total, and now it's lower later in the week. But down from a 47-point total to a 45.5-point total, so a little bit lower scoring in the game. And also the Browns have dropped from 7.5-point favorites down to 7-point favorites. So the Browns are favored by like a touchdown here. For those Browns, we are always starting Nick Chubb. You do not need to think twice about that one. Kareem Hunt, I don't love him this week, if we're being honest. Again, lower total games, so touchdowns aren't going to be like plentiful. I just think he's like a low-end running back 2 option. He's not getting a ton of snaps, a ton of targets, a ton of carries. Like, he is one of those players that's contributing in all areas, and we like to see that, right? We don't want someone only getting carries, only getting targets, only, I guess, getting 1-yard touchdowns, right? We want everything. But he's absolutely going to need a touchdown to pay off. This is also not a game script we're expecting to see Cleveland come out and need to give Kareem Hunt like 6, 7, 8 targets. And so he's a viable at running back too. Maybe you took him when you went heavy at tight end and quarterback and wide receiver early. Then I think it's fine. I think you're going to get points. You're not going to be like super disappointed. I just wouldn't be like super pumped to be playing him. And then for the Bears side, I mean, you're starting David Montgomery. It's not a great matchup. Obviously, being a touchdown underdog against a pretty quality defense in Cleveland. I don't think they've been like phenomenal this season, but they're still a defense that we're not targeting matchups for. They're still a quality defense. And so I think Montgomery is a person you're just going out there and playing. We've got Fields starting this week. I believe personally that's going to improve the efficiency of David Montgomery. Teams are not going to be able... They're going to run plays where teams can't just say, oh, this is clearly a run to Montgomery, right? If they do that enough times, Fields is busting off 30-yard carries, right? They have to respect the speed of Justin Fields. And so I think it's going to improve his efficiency. It remains to be seen what's that's going to do to his target numbers, if they're going to increase or decrease. But I think that like he hasn't been targeted like a million times so far this season, so it's definitely not going to decrease in my opinion. So I definitely think you're starting Montgomery, and you're not starting any other running back over there. Cardinals at Jaguars, second game up. This game has a high 52-point total, and the Cardinals are 7.5-point road favorites. for these Cardinals, Chase Edmonds he's not like a weekly must start, right? I don't think he's in that category, but you probably need a really, really strong running back core to consider benching him this week. He has been involved in early downs. He has been very involved in the receiving game. He's clearly their third down back, clearly the one they want to get targets. He's got touchdown upside again. They have a very high team total because if the total is 52 points and they're projected to win by a touchdown, that's a lot of points that the Cardinals are expected to score, and that should just make sense to you. They've been scoring a ton of points this season. Mix in that the fact that the Jaguars are pretty awful in most areas of the game, but they're most terrible in their defense, and a positive game script running back. Like I don't see a scenario in which you're not playing Chase Edmonds unless you have like a really, really good team. As for James Conner, he's very, very touchdown dependent. Obviously, in this spot, his touchdown chances are like pretty high, given again all the things we talked about. High total game, supposed to be winning, bad Jaguars defense. But at the end of the day, if you're in like a 10 or a 12 team league, you probably don't need to play James Conner. I probably wouldn't. If you are in a deeper format, this is one of the better spots that Conner is going to see all season, at least while he's not the starter. Like if Edmonds went down, obviously Conner would be in better spots. But while I guess Edmonds is healthy, this is probably the best spot James Conner is going to be in. So if you're not playing him now, like he's only going to be on your bench. But again, I don't have him, but I probably wouldn't be playing him. For the Jaguars, I think that James Robinson is a very clear buy low right now. I know the results have been disappointing, but his snap share went up last week. He's very clearly being used ahead of Carlos Hyde in the receiving game. He was getting a lot more carries last week. This is a good game environment. Again, we don't want the running back on the team that's losing, but he's going to get some targets. He's going to be used if they get close to the end zone. He's going to get carries. And so I think you're playing Robinson. I think you're trading for him this week. I don't think he's like a must start, so I guess there are possibly other running backs you could have ahead of him, but don't feel bad about starting him this week. I think he's like a really just rock solid running back too. Next up, we've got Chargers at Chiefs. This game was very high, 54.5 point total. The Chiefs are down. They dipped below 7. They're now 6.5 point favorites. For the Chargers, always start Eckler, no one else. For the Chiefs, I have very real concerns with Clyde right now. He is running a decent amount of routes, but he only has 3 targets on the season. He's gotten 14 and 13 carries in weeks 1 and 2, which is like fine. That's not awful for a running back to have, but it's not fantastic. He only has 2 of the team's 6 red zone carries. Darrell Williams has the only green zone carry. We saw a play designed to go to McKinnon last week close to the end zone in the receiving game. Like, I just think the fact that they're willing to use McKinnon, to use Williams, to not use any running back and just use Kelsey and Hill and Hardman and Robinson. Like, I don't know. Pringle as well we saw last week. Like, there's just so many guys they can use. I'm not in love with his situation right now. I really thought he'd be better this season. I'm not willing to call him a bust because this is a fantastic offense. They have a lot invested in him. I think he could put it all together, but I think he's very clearly not as good as we thought he would be entering the league. I think a lot of other running backs would be performing significantly better if they were in his position. But that being said, this is Kansas City. He's a starting running back. I think we're giving him another week. We're playing him as a running back too. And if he disappoints again, now we're considering him only as a flex option and maybe keeping him on the bench. I don't think now's the time to trade him because I don't think anyone's buying Clyde right now. But yeah, hopefully he puts it together this week, but he's really more of a running back too. Football team at the Bills. That one's up next. This game has seen its total drop from 46.5 points to 45.5 points. And the Bills opened as 9.5 point home favorites. So that is down to 7.5. So that's a pretty big decrease. And also, it's a big thing because if we look at opening the week, the Bills had the 5th highest team total. That's pretty good. There's a lot of teams. There's no teams on bye, right? Now they're down to 10th. So they were supposed to be tied for the 5th most points scored among all teams. They're down to 10th. That's a pretty big drop. For the football team, though, I know Gibson disappointed last week, but if you give him 1 touchdown on the season, maybe he happens to be in the game instead of McKissick last week when he scored that touchdown. well, then he'd be a mid-range running back 2 on the season. So I think we're maybe overreacting a little bit too much. Maybe it's really just draft capital. Like, you spent a lot to get Gibson, and so you were expecting him to be a rock-solid running back 1. Just understand, touchdowns are random. I think the fact that he hasn't scored a touchdown yet is a cause for concern for people. Obviously, we thought he'd be more involved in the receiving game. But also, is this more randomness? Like, McKissick didn't even play in week 1. All of a sudden, he's out there catching passes in week 2. Could that be partially the injury that Gibson suffered? I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows. But I'm not ready to just hit the panic button on Antonio Gibson, and I absolutely would not be benching him. Brutal matchup. I don't think this can be a same situation with Clyde, where it's this is the last time or last chance we're giving to Gibson. I think we need to give more chances after this, because traveling on the road to Buffalo as a significant underdog with a pretty low total yourself, that is not a good spot. We're not expecting very many running backs to produce well in those circumstances. So he's only running back 2 this week. But if this continues, then I'll be concerned. I'm just not super concerned right now. And you're not playing McKissick. For the Bills, Singletary's the lead back. If you look at only the box scores, you'll see that Moss had the 2 touchdowns, but he only got significant run because the game's a blowout. It was 35-0. I believe he scored both the touchdowns in the 4th quarter. If that game was close, Moss may have not even played very much. He might have had 0 touchdowns. So I think take that box score with a grain of salt. You cannot play Moss this week. I think he needs to be owned, but you cannot play him. I think Singletary is fine. If you need to play in the flex, preferably the second flex spot, that's okay. But with Moss getting a little bit more run right now, and the fact that Josh Allen is eventually going to score more touchdowns and not going to run as many in, I'm not in love with Singletary. But second flex spot, sure, I'm fine with that. Next up, Colts at Titans. This game has seen its total drop 248.5 from 50. That is probably because we're now anticipating, I don't know if it's confirmed yet, but we're anticipating Carson Wentz being out. So I'm going to assume that for this breakdown, and that's probably just why the total dropped again. The Titans were 5-point home favorites, and actually now they're 5-point home favorites. So that's actually one interesting tidbit. So the Titans are less of favorites now that Carson doesn't look like he's playing. I think that's more just adjusting the line to say that the Colts are still a quality team. The Titans haven't looked amazing, obviously. I think A.J. Brown is kind of still working his way back right now, so the offense isn't perfect. But the Titans should be projected to win this game, especially if Wentz is going to miss this game. For these Colts, one concerning thing other than the quarterback is that Marlon Mack played 19% of snaps in week 2, which caused Taylor and Hines to lose 10 and 8% of their snaps respectively. That is bad for both of their floors and their ceilings. Taylor's talented enough where you can't bench him. I don't really care what happens. You've got to be playing him every week. I don't care who you have on your roster. But Mac getting work, it hurts, and it also basically takes Hines completely out of flex consideration for me. It's fine if you had Hines in a 14-team full PPR league. Sure, he might get some receptions, especially because they're probably going to be losing this game, so they might have to play from behind. They might have to use Hines a little bit more, but I don't love it. I would prefer to keep Hines on the bench, and again, you got to play Taylor, and you're not playing Mac. For the Titans, it's easy. Always start the King. Just dropped 50 fantasy points last week. He's a stud. Bengals at Steelers up next. This game has seen a total drop from 45.5 to 44. That's a pretty big drop. 44 is a low total game, so we should be expecting a pretty gross game environment. Both teams should kind of struggle to move the ball consistently, at least. Maybe there's some chunk plays, but consistently moving the ball is probably not going to look very great. It's going to look pretty ugly, especially being divisional opponents. They know how each other plays. And the Steelers are down to 3-point home favorites, so it should be a relatively close game. But regardless, you're starting Mixon, you're starting Najee Harris. I don't care what the matchup is. You got to play both of them. Saints at Patriots. We've seen this game's total drop from 43 to 42. That's a very low total. And the Patriots have remained 3-point home favorites all week. I think that's a little bit aggressive. I don't know. I think this game should be much closer to a pick'em. I don't really know who's going to win this one, but giving 3 points to New England, they should have played a lot better against the Jets last week. Obviously, the Saints are a lot better than the Jets. So, I don't know. I'd have this closer to pick'em, but 3-point home favorites for the Patriots. For the Saints, easy. Always start Kamara. For the Patriots, I actually think James White is flex viable, also because I have this thinking that maybe the Saints win this game, or at least it's very, very close. and that's a game script where they're more likely to use James White than Damian Harris. And also, the only way that White is scripted out of the game is if the Saints just like don't show up, they get steamrolled. And even if that happens, well, we saw the Patriots destroy the Jets last week, but for a lot of the game, it was still like in contention, and they used James White plenty. So even in a game where they score a lot of points, they have the lead for a lot, James White can still get there. So I think he's a quality play. It's not like, oh, James White's a running back 1. He's probably not even running back 2. But if you were in a full PPR deeper format, you could be a running back 2. Or you could just play him in the flex in PPR. He's much better in PPR. But even half PPR, I think you could play him in the flex. I am not in love with Harris this week. He's going to need a touchdown to pay off. But they are home favorites. They should score 2 to 3 touchdowns. And he's the most likely player on the team to score a touchdown. I just really hate playing touchdown-dependent running backs, especially in these low total games. But I think given the volume we're expecting for him, fine in the running back 2 spot. If you have a better option, you're like, I don't love it, I want to play someone else, you can do it. I sign off on that. Falcons at Giants is up next. This game has seen its total drop from 48.5 to 47.5. And the Giants have been 3-point home favorites all week. Kind of crazy to see the Falcons just like fall off a cliff this season. I mean, they have been putrid, and being 3-point underdogs to the Giants is a telltale sign that your team is not all that good. For the Falcons, Patterson went off last week, but we need to remember that he only had a 33% snap share. He had 7 carries for 11 yards. Like, this is a solid matchup for the Falcons running backs. The Giants have allowed the 5th most running back rushing yards, the 4th most running back receptions. But this is Cordell Patterson. Like, we're not expecting every week for him to score multiple touchdowns and have 1 million receptions, right? And we saw these things can fluctuate. Both Patterson and Mike Davis had a lot of receptions last week. Remember week 1 when Swift and Jamal Williams each had like 8 or 9 receptions, something crazy like that. And then we see Jamal Williams barely had any targets last week, and Swift barely had any. He had like 2 receptions before the final garbage time drive. So these things can fluctuate every week. I would not expect Cordell Patterson to be someone that you're actually considering starting this week unless you're in a 14 or a 16 team full PPR league. And I still prefer Mike Davis, even though he hasn't scored yet. I mean, given the split, I don't see how you can play Mike Davis as anything more than a flex play who's better in full PPR. For the Giants, I think we're at the point where you have to just start Saquon Barkley. I think he is not necessarily back to being 100%, but I think he's back enough where they're just going to give him the workload, and he's Saquon Barkley. You have to be starting him no matter what the matchup is. Ravens, and actually it's a good matchup, by the way. Ravens at Lions up next. This game has seen its total rise from 49 to 50 points, and the Ravens have been 7 or 7.5 point favorites all week. For the Ravens, the Lions defense is bad, right? This is a very, very bad Lions team. But their run defense is especially embarrassing. I mean, I think everyone watched Monday night where we saw Aaron Jones score 4 touchdowns, have 1 million total yards. Like, this was only a week after allowing 100 yards and 2 scores combined to Elijah Mitchell and JaMychal Hasty, right? The Lions defense is not very good. So needless to say, good spot for Baltimore, who's also a run-first team. I'm going to be playing Williams at my second flex spot in our 14-team league, not the subscriber league. Now in 16 teams, I have him in my 14-team full PPR league. I'm playing him at the second flex spot, so that should give you like some sort of gauge as to his value. I think as of recording this, he's in that like 19 to 22 range for running backs this week, so I think he can play it as a lower end running back 2, much better as a flex play if you have a better option at running back 2. But really good chances of scoring a touchdown. Somewhat concerning that he fumbles at the goal line. They still scored. I think it was a Duvernay or something that got the ball at the end. Fumbles at the goal line, then they give Latavius Murray the next goal line carry, and he converts it on like a different drive. So somewhat concerning there. And also Bell. Pay attention to that. Do they activate Bell this week? Freeman looked like he was running with like bricks in his pants or in his shoes. Like it was off. It was ugly watching Freeman. So you know how I've been talking about, like, I think one of them gets cut between Latavius, Freeman, and Bell. Wouldn't be surprised if it was Freeman if he doesn't look a little bit better. But if they activate Bell, that's obviously a bad thing for Latavius and for Williams. I would say Latavius, you better be in like a deeper format, maybe in a standard scoring league. So if you're like in a 12-team standard league, maybe you can play him with the flex. If you're in like a 14-team league, I think he's fine But I would prefer to be in a deeper format if you're playing Latavius. He's going to need a touchdown. He's not going to have many receptions, if any. For the Lions, I talked about earlier how they had 1 billion targets, their running backs, in week 1. We saw that go significantly lower in week 2, even though they were losing for the vast majority of the game. And even if you look at the final numbers, like Swift had most of his production on the final drive of the game when they were just getting garbage time dump off. So take the production with a grain of salt. It's not going to happen every week, but they're all getting a ton of targets. Also, the Ravens ranked 12th in rush defense DVOA. They've allowed the 6th fewest yards per carry. So they have a quality defense. It's not a good spot. They're going to be losing this game. I'd say you're starting Swift in pretty much every format. I'd be a little surprised if you had someone better. But like I have Jamal Williams in our 16-team subscriber league, and I'm benching him. Right now for James White and Mooney, of course, I need to track the final status of Mooney, because if Mooney's not going to play, then I'll probably end up playing Jamal Williams at the second flex spot. But that should give you some sort of indication of Jamal Williams' values, that he's on my bench in a 16-team league. Next up, Dolphins at Raiders. This game has a pretty low 45.5 point total, like slightly below average. The Raiders are 4.5 point home favorites, even though Tua has already been declared out. So given the news that Tua is not playing, the Raiders are 4.5 point home favorites. For the Dolphins, Gaskin is the only back you can consider. I've talked about him as a buy low this week. I like his long-term value. This is not a great spot. Road underdog, low total game, your quarterback's hurt. But I would still expect Miami to kind of maybe lean on the ground game, lean on the running backs, because they don't want Brissett going out there and doing what he did last week, scoring 0 points against Buffalo, looking absolutely pathetic. And obviously, the Raiders have a worse defense than Buffalo. So we're expecting a little bit more success this week. Also, he's going to get the first team snaps. Like, they're going to be a little bit more prepared this week. They were obviously surprised that Tua got hurt last week. So I'd expect a better performance. Not expecting Gaskin to like blow up or anything, but I think he's like a solid running back too. For the Raiders, I don't know what the final status of Jacobs is going to be. I'm just going to, for this, assume he's out. If he plays, we need to know like how healthy is he. He'd be a home favorite on a team that is like probably going to run the ball a lot, because that's the best way to attack the Dolphins' defense. But I'm going to assume that he's out for this. Just play him if he's playing and you think he's going to be good, and probably bench Kenyon Drake. If not, what an embarrassment. I mean, come on. Like they gave Peyton Barber 13 touches for 19 yards. Like, who in their right mind gives Peyton Barber 13 touches in the year 2021? It doesn't make any sense. But regardless, or excuse me, did I say 13 carries for 19 yards? It was 13 carries on 19 snaps for 32 yards. But regardless, Peyton Barber's bad. They shouldn't be giving him touches, but it happened. And so we need to consider that maybe Kenyon Drake is not a slam dunk play if Josh Jacobs is out. I think that you are playing him if that's the case. The Dolphins, again, like I've said for the past few weeks, they're best attacked on the ground, 28th in yards per carry allowed, 27th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. And like I said, the Raiders are home favorites, good spot for the running backs. So obviously bench Barber. I think you're playing Drake in the flex, but if you came to me and you're like, I know the matchup is there, I don't trust the Raiders offense, or at least their running backs, without Jacobs in the lineup, and I have other options, do it. I do not think he's a must play. Next up, we've got Jets at Broncos. This game has an extremely low, I believe the lowest in the week, 41.5 point total, and the Broncos are 10.5 point home favorites. That means the Jets are projected to score 15.5 points. That is embarrassing for an NFL franchise to be projected to score on average 15.5 points. For the Jets, Michael Carter is the only one that you should even own. He's the only one you can consider playing. But this is like one of, if not the worst spots imaginable. I guess in Tampa Bay might be worse, but this is a very, very bad spot. I had a pretty hard time playing pretty much any Jets player this week. For the Broncos, Melvin Gordon overtook Javonte Williams in snap share last week, but they had the exact same number of carries, and Williams was far more productive on his carries. Also, if we look back on the season so far for Melvin Gordon, aside from his 70-yard rushing touchdown on his final touch of week 1, he has 23 carries for 62 yards. So he's not performing all that great this season. The matchup is so good that I think both of them are flex viable, or you can maybe play them both as a running back too. But obviously, each one hurts the other's upside and floor. Bucks at Rams is up next. This is tied, I guess, with our next game for the highest total game of the season so far, up to 56 points. And the Rams opened as 2-point home favorites. That has been bet in the Bucks' favor. The Bucks are now projected to win by a point on the road. This is going to be a wild game. Both teams projected to score north of 27 points. Both great offenses. Both of their strengths are in the passing game, though. So when you usually look at a 56-point total game, you're like, play everyone, which we're going to talk about in the next game. But it doesn't necessarily mean that in this game for the running backs. Fournette is probably the only one that I would play on the Bucks, and it would be at like a flex play, or maybe if you're thin at running back 2 and you want to play him, that would be fine. But I'm not playing Ronald Jones. I'm not playing Giovanni Bernard. And then if Henderson is out, I don't really want to play Sony Michel in this matchup. I don't want to play Jake Funk. I just want to see how that kind of works out. So maybe you play Henderson as a flex play, preferably in full PPR. But if he's out, yikes. I mean, Leonard Fournette might be the only running back I play in this game. So watch the status of Henderson. If he's active, you're probably playing him because they're going to need to use him in the receiving game. This is a brutal matchup for the Rams running backs. I think we're going to see our first game this season where Stafford is unleashed. He's able to just throw the ball as much as he wants. And we see explosion spots from at least one player. Maybe it's Cooper Kupp. Maybe it's Robert Woods. Maybe it's one of the ancillary weapons, or maybe it's Tyler Higbee. Someone's exploding in this spot. Most likely is Cooper Kupp again, but someone's going off. I don't think it's the running backs. The opposite is true, though, for the next game. So we saw what happened with Bucks and Rams. This game also has a 56-point total, and it's Seahawks at Vikings, and you're playing everyone. You're playing Chris Carson. You're playing Dalvin Cook. You're playing the wide receivers. That's going to be a fun game to watch. Sunday Night Football, we're going to have Packers at 49ers. This one has seen its total rise to 49.5 points, and the 49ers are 3.5-point home favorites. For the Packers, always start Aaron Jones. You saw his upside last week. For the 49ers, who knows? Honestly, there are so many potential combinations of actives and inactives that it's not worth guessing. We honestly, the scary part is that we're probably not going to know for sure who exactly is active and inactive until Sunday night. So if you're deciding between two players, you might just want to play the one that is playing at 1 o'clock, playing at 4 o'clock, because if you get to the Sunday night game and they're inactive, you're not going to feel great, because now what do? You have very few options on free agency. So unless we know for sure on Friday, on Saturday, on Sunday morning exactly who's active and inactive, I might just avoid this game for the running backs. But if we see something like, I don't know, Elijah Mitchell's active, Trey Sermon's inactive, and then it's just those scrubs they called up because we know Hasty's not going to play. If that happens, you probably want to play Elijah Mitchell. He's the only one that you give touches to. But what if Mitchell's down and now Sermon is active and we know Hasty's inactive and it's all the other scrubs are calling up? Well, now I probably want to play Trey Sermon, but it's if we don't know that until Sunday night, you might not want to risk it. So it really comes down to your risk tolerance with this one, but that's kind of how I'd be playing things. Final game of the week is Monday Night Football, where the Eagles will travel to Dallas to take on the Cowboys. This game is a 51.5-point total, and the Cowboys are up to 4-point home favorites. For the Eagles, I don't think Miles Sanders is a must-start each week, but he's the lead back in a high-scoring game against a mediocre defense, so I'd be pretty surprised if you were benching him this week. For Dallas, I went over what to do with Ezekiel Elliott on the TikTok that I made, so make sure you're following me over there. I'm answering a lot of your questions, so if you just post a question in the comment section there, I'll make a video touching on that point. That's what I did for the Zeke question. But go over there if you want to take on what I'm doing with Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. As far as this week is concerned, the Eagles are a neutral matchup, and the game environment is really, really good. Plus, Amari Cooper's a little bit banged up. If he's out, it's even better for the running backs. But if he plays, it's still a potential positive because he could just be a decoy. So I would be pretty surprised if you had a running back core that was good enough to bench Ezekiel Elliott. The bigger question is what to do with Tony Pollard. Right now, I have him as running back 34, but he's only 2 points behind the running back 24. So he's really in that range of flex consideration. Dallas is very clearly not going to give him a million snaps, but when he's out there, they're giving him the touches, right? He had 16 touches on 21 snaps last week. So given that he's also performing really well, and again, good game environment, I don't know that I would play him in a 10 or a 12 team league unless you have 2 flex spots, but I could see it. I could see it if you really wanted to do that. And if you're desperate at running back 2 in a full PPR league, I could see that. If you're in a 14, a 16 team league, I can absolutely see playing him. So there are situations where I'd be fine with it. Again, he's right in that range. 25 to 35 for the running backs. It's a coin flip. You're probably going to need a touchdown from any of these guys, but he's looked really good. His role is clearly expanding. And so if you want to do it, go for it. Just understand one thing, that 16 touches on 21 snaps is unsustainable. He's not going to get that high of a percentage every week. So that is my breakdown for every matchup this week. And remember, you can see my exact rankings on every single scoring format by looking at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. And if you want more content, you want to ask specific questions that I will answer in video form, then I will be trying to post daily videos on TikTok. There's a link in the description. You can search Nick Zalk and discover. There are ways you can find it. I promise you will, but it's the Linktree slash FFA in the description. So that'll do it for this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting the like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.